Hey, it's Mr. Shrum, and this is the last of our Edmentum tutorial walkthroughs, and we are focusing on the environmental impacts on evolution. So, we're going to use evidence to show that changes in the environment may result in changes in a species over time. So, to start off, we have a warm-up. Think about two words that make up the term reproductive isolation. How do you think reproductive isolation affects the evolution of a species? Well, our sample answer here is reproductive isolation refers to populations of organisms that have become isolated from each other. A geographical barrier or a genetic change can cause this isolation. As a result, the organisms are not able to successfully reproduce with each other. The two populations evolve separately from each other, likely developing different frequencies of genetic mutations and possibly selecting different traits. So, that will become a little more clear by the time we get through this lesson. And the next warm-up question, all organisms need natural resources from their environment to survive. Select any plant or animal and describe 3 resources that the organism needs for survival. So the answer, the sample answer picks hermit crabs because the writer had it as a pet. Hermit crabs need to live near water because their offspring start life in the water. These offspring grow and develop in water to become land crabs. They also need a wide variety of shells around because they carry one on their back for shelter and protection. As they grow, they need access to larger shells. Food is another resource that hermit crabs need, and the species owned by the writer of this sample answer survived on a primarily fruit-based diet. Interesting. So that's the intro page. Now we're going to actually talk about reproductive isolation and, in turn, speciation. Reproductive isolation and speciation. Members of the same species are individuals that can produce fertile offspring with each other. Offspring meaning children. Through the slow and continuous course of evolution, new species develop from existing species. Speciation is a lineage splitting event that produces 2 or more separate species from a common ancestor. Fertility is the key to propagation. Propagation means reproducing. It's just another fancier way to say reproducing, and fertility is the key to propagation and evolution of a species. So for a species to continue to live on and evolve, fertility is key. A fertile organism reproduces to give rise to new offspring. Recent progress has allowed us to develop hybrid organisms that can be made by mating 2 closely related species. However, often the offspring turn out to be sterile. They're not able to propagate the species, but they are a hybrid of 2 closely related things. Sometimes populations are prevented from interbreeding because of geographical barriers or unfavorable conditions. These barriers lead to reproductive isolation and eventually speciation. Let's explore the different mechanisms of reproductive isolation. Okay, so there are types of isolation. Reproductive isolation occurs when members of a potentially interbreeding population face a barrier that inhibits reproduction. There are several factors that may stop similar species from interbreeding. Let's take a look at 2 forms of reproductive isolation: pre-zygotic and post-zygotic. Pre-zygotic isolation occurs before an egg can be successfully fertilized. So this is before egg fertilization. Prezygotic isolation takes place in many ways. So we can have temporal isolation. Temporal means time. So species experience a temporal isolation when they mate at different times. For example, the red-legged frog and the yellow-legged frog experience temporal isolation because they have different mating seasons and therefore cannot mate with each other. So if they are trying to mate in this season, the other species is trying to mate in another season. So they're never mating at the same time. Mechanical isolation, that means structural differences in the reproductive organs of organisms lead to mechanical isolation. So plants may develop adaptations in their reproductive structures to attract specific pollinators like bees. Mechanical isolation occurs when a pollinator attempts to pollinate a species that does not have compatible structures. So if a bee tries to go to a plant that's not designed to be pollinated that way, not designed, but it has not adapted to that certain type of bee pollination, then it's not going to work. They're not compatible. It's like when you need a charger for an iPhone versus an Android, and they're not the same, they're not compatible, it doesn't work, right? Same thing, basically the same thing. Behavioral isolation. So sometimes two populations differ in reproductive behavior. For example, birds in one region may have different mating calls than the same species in another region. The organisms may be structurally or temporally compatible, but their individual behaviors, reproductive behaviors, may be incompatible. And that difference leads to behavioral isolation. So here we have two birds, similar. They're both meadowlarks, but they're from different regions, so they sound different to the ear. Gametic isolation occurs when the gametes of two species are incompatible. So remember, gametes are the sperm and egg. Those are fancy words for sperm and egg. For some related species, the sperm and egg may come into contact, but they cannot fuse to form a zygote. The sperm may not be able to read the chemical signals sent by the egg, which help the sperm reach the egg. Gametic isolation is seen in organisms with fertilization occurring outside the body. For example, some marine animals release eggs into the water to be fertilized. Fun fact. So that's prezygotic. That's all before an egg can be fertilized. Now we're going to look at post-zygotic isolation, and these occur after fertilization happens. And this timing affects either the survival of the offspring or their reproductive capacity. In some cases, the organisms mate, but they may not produce offspring. In other cases, the offspring are sterile hybrids. So, for example, if you take a horse and a donkey, they are separate species, but they can mate with each other, but their offspring, which is a mule, is sterile, often sterile. So a mule cannot mate with another mule. That's not how this works. So the hybrid may not be able to survive long after fertilization. If a hybrid does survive after birth, it's weaker than its parent species, and it's not able to adapt well to the environment. I mean, not being able to reproduce is a big, hold up. You can't really improve if you're the end of the line. So we have these examples, and we put them in either the prezygotic isolation or the post-zygotic isolation category. In the prezygotic, this is before egg fertilization, brown bears and polar bears are separated by geographical area. Two closely related species of frogs live in the same region, but they have different mating seasons. Two species of guppies show different mating behaviors. Okay, so that's temporal isolation, behavioral isolation, and I forgot I guess that would be temporal. You just say it's like maybe behavioral too. At any rate, it's before the egg can be fertilized. That's what separates the brown bears and polar bears. And post-zygotic isolation, those examples are a hybrid zygote of two species dies after a few cell divisions in the mother's womb. Two species of plants reproduce and create sterile offspring. So think sterility, post-zygotic. Anytime you see a hybrid zygote, that is after fertilization. Now, speciation occurs in many ways. So we're going to look at the two main types, allopatric and sympatric. Allopatric speciation occurs when a physical or geographical barrier separates a species and a new species forms. Geographic barriers may include mountain ranges, bodies of water, and for example, new squirrel species developed after the Grand Canyon formed. Sudden changes such as volcanic eruptions and earthquakes can also lead to speciation. As a result of this separation, the species undergo adaptations to fit the new environment. The newly formed species may not be able to breed with each other, or they may create offspring that are unviable or infertile. The new species that form due to allopatric speciation have a common ancestor. They also inherit features from the existing species. Sympatric speciation is speciation that occurs without geographical barriers as the cause. Species live in the same region, but they separate and evolve for different reasons. For example, some insects underwent speciation based on food choices. Depending on the type of food they ate, the insects evolved different adaptations and became different species. Pacific Northwest offer another example of sympatric speciation. Different orca species emerged in the region based on their diet and social behavior. So allopatric, there's some type of geographical barrier involved. Sympatric, species are living in the same region, but they separate and evolve for different reasons other than geographic. So here we go. A scientist raised a species of fruit flies over several generations in separate containers. The diagram shows what happened as a result of the experiment. Do you think this is an example of allopatric speciation or sympatric speciation? Explain your reasoning. So we have the initial samples of fruit flies. They are separated into containers with a starch medium. And after several generations, you see how this one's actually a lighter color than this one. And this one is a darker color than the previous generations as well. So now we see that they are mating with each other, but they can also mate with the other group as well. This is allopatric speciation. Why? Well, imagine that they were separated by a geographical barrier. That is why these were split up. They didn't split up on their own. The experimenters split them up into those separate groups and let them evolve or reproduce. And the separation caused them to evolve to the point that they were more likely to mate with each other than with a member of another tank. Notice they stick together mostly, but they do interbreed. But they prefer the ones that are in their own group. Now we're going to talk about patterns of evolution. Species evolve different traits and then undergo natural selection. Species evolve different traits which then undergo natural selection. Species engage in different patterns of evolution that help them survive in their habitats. So let's look at some of these patterns of evolution. Coevolution. Many species evolve in close association with each other, which may affect the evolution of the species. When two or more species affect each other's evolution, it is known as coevolution. Mutualism and parasitism are forms of coevolution. Mutualism, if the co-evolving species benefit each other, then they are said to be in a mutual relationship. The organisms evolve to adapt to each other's needs. For example, flowers evolved structures to attract bees for pollination. Many flowers also have powerful scents to attract bees. Bees, on the other hand, have evolved adaptations that help them identify flowers. For example, they have bristly hairs to detect the electrical signals around flowers. So this type of relationship is very common in nature, a give and take, a gentle balance. Now, parasitism. No one loves parasites. Some species have a parasitic relationship with each other with other species. The parasite evolved adaptations so that it can survive on the host, and the host may evolve to protect itself from the parasite. So, for example, head lice, really gross creature, are insects that evolved hook-like structures on their legs, and this helps them climb on hair strands and hold on for dear life. Here they're pictured here. Hopefully you haven't had lice. We haven't really had to deal with that this year as much, but it's not fun. Adaptive radiation or divergent evolution. In some cases, adaptive radiation can trigger the diversification of a species from an existing common ancestor. This event may occur because of specialization, which is the adaptation of organisms to fit the environment. Organisms may develop different features when their food or shelter preferences change. To adapt to changing conditions, they evolve into distinct species. These species can evolve in the exact same location, but over time, they may branch out to other geographical regions. For example, more than 300 species of cichlid. I'm gonna read that out loud. Cichlid. Okay, so rewind. For example, more than 300 species of cichlid fish that live in the Great Lakes of Africa are thought to have evolved from a single ancestor. Convergent evolution occurs when two unrelated species, separated by geographical barriers, develop similar adaptations. The species may live in similar climates that cause them to evolve similar features. So here we have flying squirrels and flying phalangers. These are examples of organisms that show convergent evolution. Flying squirrels belong to the squirrel family, of course, while phalangers are marsupials. So they're closer to kangaroos, possums. Both species have gliders with skin stretched between limbs to increase surface area that helps in flying. Very cool. So that brings us to an activity called Revisiting Darwin's Findings. So Charles Darwin's findings were pivotal to the formation of the theory of evolution. He noted that the Galapagos Islands, which were located, they are located about 1,000 kilometers away from South America. Bonus points if you know how far that is in miles. So 1,000 kilometers away from South America, there were different types of finches on this Galapagos Island. These species were all believed to have evolved from a species on the mainland, but they developed different adaptations to survive in their environment. Based on this information and the image, answer the following questions. So you have, here's the Galapagos Islands, and then you have a cactus finch, a warbler finch, and a large ground finch. And it gives you characteristics of their beaks and how they find food. What's their food source? So the cactus finch has long pointed beak and it gets seeds from cacti. So that's why the cactus finch is called the cactus finch. The warbler finch has a thin, sharp beak and it can spear insects and eat food that way. The large ground finch has a short and heavy beak to eat large seeds found on the ground. Do the information given and the map best describe adaptive evolution, convergent evolution, or co-evolution? Oh. The information here best fits adaptive evolution, because all the finches have the same common ancestor, but they all became specialized to adapt to the type of food in their environment. So you have the large ground finch with a big beak for getting seeds off the ground. The warbler finch can eat insects, and the cactus finch can use cactus seeds to eat. So that's cool. Recent research has found that on one island of the Galapagos, two finch species interbred. And this interbreeding may have resulted in a hybrid species that ultimately led to the extinction of one of the species Darwin discovered. They call this speciation in reverse. That's the phrase, speciation in reverse or de-speciation. Based on what you know about speciation, speciation, why are these terms appropriate? Well, speciation is the method by which unique species evolve from a common ancestor. In this case, two of these species that split from a common ancestor interbred and created a hybrid. This hybrid was apparently stronger and possibly better adapted to the environment, which led to extinction of a species formed by the initial speciation event. If the findings described in Part B are correct, do the finches that are described fit the category of reproductive isolation? Why or why not? No, so they don't fit the category of reproductive isolation. They are interbreeding and they are able to have viable offspring. If this was a case of reproductive isolation, they would not be able to create offspring. Just to make things clear. Why does this recent discovery about the Galapagos finches prove that it's often challenging for scientists to determine when two groups of individuals are separate species? What factors do scientists need to consider when determining whether a species is a new species or part of an existing species? Individuals may look different from each other, meaning they have a wide degree of genetic variation, but they still breed and produce fertile offspring. Scientists must evaluate many different factors: genes, anatomical structures, mating seasons, and geographical location. to determine whether it is possible for two species to produce fertile offspring. All right, so that brings us to the next big section called environmental changes in evolution. I will stop there today, this time today. I'll probably get back on eventually today, but I will see you guys next time. And if you have any questions, be sure to message me in Canvas, email me. I'll be glad to help you in any way I can. But until next time, have a great day and rest of your week. And I will see you guys later. Bye.